Hello, honey. Whatever you like, I do for you. Only $4 more, that's okay.
Hello. I want to play a game. Live or die. Make your choice.
Okay, good morning. So, listen. Are you listening? I need to talk to you for a second. I know it's not Tuesday, and I'm very sorry. That's just all I have to say. There's nothing else I can say to make it up to you guys. I'm sorry. I can't even make any excuses. I just simply was irresponsible this week. That's all. I have so many endeavors that I'm working on right now, so it just got a little crazy, and Terror Tuesday got on the back burner, and I'm just very sorry. Okay. First of all, everyone needs to take a moment and address I just love it. And it's so soft. It was $10 at Target. Okay, so today's story is a little wild, as most of them are. I will do an update on Kylie, please. Bear with me. Today's story is about the Grim Sleeper. And his real name is Lonnie David Franklin Jr. Lonnie was born August 30th, 1952 in Los Angeles, California. He ended up getting married later on and ended up having 2 kids. Not much is really said about his children, which I think is a good thing. I would assume, I can't speak for them, but I would assume they probably wanted to fly under the radar after this series of unfortunate events. So after Lonnie got married, he enlisted in the United States Army, but he was dishonorably discharged in July 1975 due to a conviction of 17-year-old little girl in Germany in April of 1974. So it's safe to say that this dude is already a piece of shit. But we continue. The backstory about the 1975 conviction: Lonnie and his 2 other Army friends were driving, and they saw a girl walking down the street, and they stopped and asked her for directions. And so when they got to chit-chatting with her, they offered her a ride, and she accepted, unfortunately. When she first got into the vehicle, they put a knife to her throat and drove off into a random field in the middle of nowhere, and they repeatedly assaulted her. This girl was actually a genius. She ended up using reverse psychology and talked Lonnie into the fact that she actually liked him and wanted to go on a date with him. So she asked for his phone number, and when they let her go, this is how she was able to identify him to the police, that they tracked his number and ended up finding him that way. So kudos to this girl, man. I don't even know if I was put in that situation, if I would have thought of that. So that's amazing. And I think that's not great. So hear me out. That's a great way to identify your offender, but it's not great that she had to do that. You know what I'm saying? So she shouldn't have ever been in that situation in the first place. Don't be a piece of shit, Lonnie. It's not that hard. Anyway, but it is wonderful that she thought of that and was able to do that. Also, the dumbasses, they took pictures of assaulting this little girl, and this was the start of a common practice in his offenses later on in life. So then in 1989, he was convicted of 2 charges of theft, 1 charge of a misdemeanor assault, and 1 charge of battery. He only served time for 1 of the theft charges. I'm assuming he probably did some type of plea bargain. Lonnie had several offenses in the 1980s. This is where most of his assaults had taken place. In the mid-1980s, Los Angeles Police Department were notified by several people that there was a serial killer on the loose, and his targeted victims were Black women who were drug addicts and sex workers and often homeless. So very vulnerable women. And in Lonnie's mind, this was because these women probably frequently just disappeared off the face of the earth to go do what they needed to do, and then obviously eventually they returned to the surface and got into contact with their families. So in his mind, these women's families wouldn't go looking for them right away because it was common practice for these women to just disappear for days, weeks, months at a time. Going off of this, LAPD was able to link 13 offenses together between the years of 1983 to 1985. Police originally named him the Southside Slayer, but he also had another nickname of the Strawberry Killer. And supposedly Strawberry is a code word for women who are willing to do sex work for drugs, which I didn't even know that. I'm not hip on straight lingo. God, I'm such a nerd. Honey, hi, Tizzy. Hi, Peppers. You just never get any lovins, do her. God, you got drool all over my iPad, you bitch. Okay, so officers did a press conference in September of 1985 asking the public for any and all tips that would possibly lead to a conviction of the serial killer. The public was pissed because they didn't let people know sooner. They let this go on for 2 years before they made it public, which, I mean, that's pretty shitty. I do have to admit. Protests were organized outside of the police station for them to put more effort into solving this case because they felt that law enforcement officers were not putting enough effort into this investigation. Like, they didn't really care because they were women of low socioeconomic statuses, women who participated in crime often, and almost like they were looked at as less than because they weren't productive members of society, so to speak. And also at this time, Richard Ramirez, or the Night Stalker, was another profound serial killer in this area. And so people felt that the Night Stalker was of utmost importance because he was targeting rich white women in more upscale neighborhoods, which of course LAPD denied these claims pretty quickly. Of course they did. Of course they did. Anyway, so in 1985, 15 more victims were identified as Lonnie's victims. Obviously, they didn't know that Lonnie was this offender. They just knew that there was an offender. And so LAPD had no choice but to recruit Los Angeles Sheriff's Office to kind of assist them in the investigation. And they had put together a task force, and they named this task force the Southside Slayer Task Force. I'm still freaking sick, guys. Well, okay, well, I'm not sick, but I still have no voice, and I just a thirsty girl. Lay down, mama. Lay down. Looks like we have a guest speaker on the show today. Okay. So they named this task force the Southside Slayer Task Force. So this case remained under investigation all through 1986, and a reward was offered for $10,000, which is almost a slap in the face to these poor victims. These protesters formed a I have never met a derpier breed than German Shepherds, I swear to God. Okay, so the protesters put together a formal group called, sorry, this is a lot, the Black Coalition Fighting Back Serial Murders, and they were strongly pressuring law enforcement to up the reward to $25,000. And upon further investigation, there were reports of conflicting descriptions of the offenders. I'm sorry, it's not funny. I'm laughing because Luna's acting like a nutbag. These conflicting descriptions made law enforcement question their suspected killings of 13 to 15 victims, and they came to the conclusion that at least 4 people were actively murdering Black women who were workers and addicts. I just hate saying it like that because it doesn't matter what their profession was or if they were addicts. It doesn't matter. They're still human beings and they deserve to be treated as such, and they should have been as important as the Night Stalker's victims. So this new theory of law enforcement had slowed down investigators because they weren't really sure like what direction to pursue next. And it was requiring a lot of manpower, as they said. Anyway, Lieutenant John Zorn had made a public statement saying, and I quote, "The flow of clues is almost non-existent at this point." Okay, but like it's your job to get that shit together, sir. Okay. So over the next few years, there were multiple people confirmed to be murdering Lonnie's supposed victims. Some guy named Lewis Crane had committed at least 2 of the murders that were originally suspected by the Southside Slayer. Confirmation was given that Michael Hughes, Daniel Lee Seibert, Chester Turner and Ivan Hill, they also committed at least one murder apiece. And it also was suspected that some of the victims' pimps were actually their killers. This was due to the way that the crime scenes were found. I don't know how they made that assumption, but anyway. Okay, so here's where the real tea starts. Was a police officer the Southside Slayer? So 3 women were murdered by the same 9mm pistol. Their names were Judith Simpson, Cynthia Walker, and LaTanya Johnson. So in late 1988, the Southside Slayer Task Force made this connection that the 9mm pistol was all the same pistol. The bullets from the 9mm pistols were all from the same pistol. Sheriff's Detective Ricky Ross was actually arrested for these 3 murders because he was caught with drugs in his vehicle as well as a Stalker and a rusty 9mm pistol. The gun was tested by the forensics team. They found that this gun was not the murder weapon, and so Ricky Ross was released, and these murders still to this day remain unsolved. So in 1987, 7 of the murders were linked to the same killer because they were all committed with a .25 caliber firearm, all of which had victims' killings being committed at very close range. So these killings also remain unsolved by detectives. And this suspect that committed these murders was nicknamed the Grim Sleeper. This was because of his inactivity in between his murders. Like, it was very random spurts of times he would go on sprees, and then there would be years in between that he did nothing. So this is an unrelated note that I had found interesting. In 2007, the murder of Janisha Peters, I hope I said that right, I'm sorry, Janisha. Her murder had linked 11 other killings to the same perpetrator by the means of DNA. By the means of DNA. Come on. By the means of DNA. So in 2007, the 11 killings had began in 1985 and spread all the way across to 2007. And with these killings, a secret task force was assigned to this case, but they didn't make that known to the public for several years. And LA Weekly was actually the source of some family members of the victims being notified that this was the case, that their killings were linked together by DNA. Law enforcement didn't notify these families, they didn't even know that DNA was even found on them. In 2008, LAPD had publicly announced that they had raised the reward leading to the killer's arrest to $500,000, which is more like it. Thank you guys. Get it the frick together. God. The news had released a 911 call of someone reporting Lonnie to be dumping the bodies. The caller had supplied a vehicle description and also a description of Lonnie and also a license plate number, which, thank you. So the vehicle was actually owned by a church called Cosmopolitan, and this church is now closed today. The only living victim of the Southside Slayer had came forward and gave a description of Lonnie, stating that he was a black male in his early to mid 30s. He looked neat and tidy and was also kind of geeky. That's not my description, that's her description. And she's entitled to that description because he tried to kill her. Fuck that dude. And he wore a black polo shirt and khaki pants. She also gave a similar description of his vehicle that the original caller had reported. So extra arrests that were unrelated to murders. In 2003, Lonnie was arrested for a felony charge and police officers failed to get a DNA sample from him. What the fuck are you guys doing? I mean, come on. His DNA from this crime would have linked him to all of the other killings, but obviously they failed to get a DNA test. So in 2004, a law was passed that anyone arrested for felony charges and some misdemeanor crimes, a DNA sample was required from them, obviously to avoid something like this from happening again. Good idea. Somehow Lonnie was suspected, Lonnie actually was suspected for these murders, and so an undercover cop pretended to be a waiter at a local pizza joint that Lonnie frequented. And so when Lonnie got done eating, the undercover police officer retrieved his half-eaten pizza, and they did a DNA test on that, and this confirmed Lonnie to be the perpetrator to all of these other murders. Lonnie was tried for 10 of his several other murders and then 1 attempted murder of his crimes, even though he was suspected of even more than that. He sat in jail awaiting his trial and no bond was given. There was an 11th victim that Lonnie was a strong suspect of, but they weren't able to convict him because they didn't get DNA from the crime scene. He never admitted to these crimes, and his trial was not until February of 2016. This dude's offenses started in the early 80s. Like, get your shit together, guys. Someone is requiring my attention. I'm sorry. I know this is distracting. But you can see her little nose. They're so pretty. The trial and jury deliberation had lasted a few months, and his verdict was not read until May of 2016. Lonnie was obviously found guilty on all counts. He sat in jail until May 12th, 2016, when his sentence was actually given to him. And at this time, 4 more victims were linked to him, but they didn't want to pursue these charges because it could delay his trial and his sentencing even further. So officially on June 6, 2016, he was found guilty on all counts and was sentenced to death by the jury. Unfortunately, he was found dead in his cell on March 28th, 2020. He never got to receive his sentence, and I'm sure that some of his family had kind of felt like, even though he died, they weren't able to really receive justice because, you know, he wasn't put to death for his crimes. He just freaking died. Like, what a loser. Right? He was a fucking loser. Right? Yeah. So an autopsy was done on Lonnie's body, and no foul play was suspected, but they wouldn't release his actual cause of death to the public, which... that's suspicious. So we've come to the point in this episode, what can we learn from this? There's a few things. Number 1, don't freaking kill people. I mean, secondly, time and time again, it has been proven by law enforcement that women of more rough, lower class backgrounds, they are not put on the front burner of importance to get these murders solved, which is super unfortunate. I feel like everyone should be treated equally. It's freaking stupid. I'm sorry, I'm like freezing in this house. It's like 66 degrees in here. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you found this case interesting. Please stay tuned for next Tuesday, and I promise that I will not be irresponsible again, and the video will be posted on Tuesday. There's a lot of footage and a lot of bloopers due to my freaking daughter, my dog, being ridiculous and being attention whore. Can't imagine where she gets that from. Certainly not me. Again, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you guys. Like, share, subscribe, comment. Tell me that you found this interesting and that Luna is the prettiest dog in the world, or else she'll cry. I don't make the rules. She does, okay? So just go with it. Bye-bye. Bye!